All right, we are officially recording. It's off to you, Jane.
Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the Indivisible Florida Network Summer Speaker Series, which tonight is featuring Amy Siskind and which we're extremely excited about. The Indivisible Florida Network brings together 18 local Indivisible groups we all formed after the 2016 election, bringing together in our groups Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, and all of us who've been united on making Trump a one-term president. And we're only a few months from that goal and achieving it. So if you'd like to join us and find out about how nice it is to belong to one of our groups, go to indivisibleflorida.org and you'll find a group near you, and we will have also a little sign up there pretty soon. I would now, I should introduce myself too. I'm Jane Hunter and I'm the leader of Englewood Indivisible. And I'd now like to pass the duties on to Lori Woodward-Garcia, who's the leader of Broward for Progress, who has organized tonight's program and will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. As Jane said, I'm one of the Indivisible Florida Network leaders. I represent Broward for Progress. I've got a couple of my co-leaders on here and some members, so shout out to all of you. We are super excited. This is our second program with the network on speakers that bring value to our members, talking about discussion points that are really impactful for our state, things to look out for, things that we on the ground should be aware of. And this speaker was at the top of our wish list when we were talking about speakers. So I'm really excited she's with us. Again, if anybody has questions, just type in question and then put that in there and we'll try and get to them. I am super excited to introduce Amy Siskind. If you aren't following her, you will be by the end of this program. You want to jump on Twitter, you want to jump on Facebook, you want to follow her because she has been just amazing, and you're going to hear why. Amy is the author of the list, A Week by Week Reckoning of Trump's First Year. She's the organizer of We the People March. She appears on CNN, Fox, CNBC, PBS, NPR, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Politico, The Hill. She's an expert on authoritarianism. She's a published author. She's an expert on helping women and girls advance and succeed, which is near and dear to my heart. She's a former Wall Street executive. That's why she's so wicked smart. And the president and co-founder of the New Agenda, a national organization working on issues including economic independence and advancement, gender representation and bias, and campus sexual assault. She is a fierce advocate for equality now that occurs alongside her mission as one of the most thorough and vocal observers of our failing but not yet failed democracy. I love this. When I looked her up on Wikipedia, they said that she was a national spokeswoman. So without further ado, I will kick it off to Amy.
Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you. And thank you all for having me. And before we start, I just wanted to express my well wishes for all of you dealing with COVID-19. I live next to New Rochelle, which was called New Rohell by our local media. And so I lived through the first cluster. And I'm just sending all my thoughts to you all for getting through it as best you can. So getting on to the list and why I've been keeping track of him. So just brief background on that and where we are, and the reason why I wanted to speak to your group. First off, I'm a Jewish American, and as Trump ran for office, everything that I had learned growing up about authoritarianism and Hitler went ding, ding, ding in my head. I was extremely alarmed. I see people shaking their head. It was just a repeat. And the one thing you learn as you study authoritarianism is so many things that are happening in our country have happened before in history. In fact, after Trump got elected and many of us were trying to figure out what's next and putting away all the cupcakes with the H's on them and realizing we were in big trouble, one of the first things I did is read out what to do in a time like this. And there were articles by Marcia Gessen at that time, and pretty much everything she wrote in November 2016 has happened, which gives you a certain comfort to know that we're not in a moment of history unlike another. It's just we're coming up to that safety valve to stop what will become significantly worse if we do not, and why it's such a critical time. It took the first year of me keeping this list to, when there were very few of us up front who recognized that this was authoritarianism on the rise, and we were called varying degrees of hysterical for doing so. But I kept keeping this list, which is something that the experts warned about, to make a note, write it down, because things will start to change and you'll be like that frog in water coming to boil degree by degree. You don't notice until you're boiling. So that was the exercise of running things down. And the first week had 9 items. Then the second week had 18. By the time I got to week 5, there were 24 items, and people were saying, oh, I missed this and that. Can you start to add links? But just to give you some perspective of where we started and where we've been, we're now up to about 300 not normal items a week. Again, we started with 9. And in that first week, Trump was criticizing the New York Times in tweets, the cast of Hamilton. He was saying that we needed to grant understanding as the rise in hate crime started right after his election. So the interesting thing about Trump is he hasn't changed. He's the same person he was when he entered the stage and went down the elevator and started talking about Mexican rapists. He's the same man, and he's always had, in my mind, 2 goals. One was to enrich himself, and the other was to stay in power. And he will do anything to stay in power, but I'm a lot less sanguine about his ability to do so than I was if you had heard me speak during the book tour and during other events that I've done. So just briefly, what has changed and why the list, and why is it so important, this exercise of writing things down? Just think about what we have normalized. First of all, in the first 100 days, the number of lies he told were roughly 5.4 per day. Now he tells roughly 26 lies a day. So we are that frog, water coming to boil, and in any given day, so many of the things that happen could be front page of the New York Times and lead story on CNN for weeks. Now we have 5 to 10 of those each day. And so we're always screaming, we're always exhausted, and we're always like, oh my God, this isn't right. But there's also been a sense of learned helplessness in a way. That happened. If we had this discussion 6 months ago, I would have a much different philosophy. But I think things have shifted given these triple crises that we live in. But what are some of the things that we've normalized? Well, one of the things that I recognized in the first week of the list is Trump started to badmouth NATO. And if you go to my website after the weeklylist.org to look at the list, there's some videos I did in the first year that everything that has happened was so easy to see it was coming. One of the videos I did was on how he was distancing us from our Democratic allies, not Democratic like Democratic Party, but democracies around the world. And he was cozying up to authoritarians. You could see that in the first year in 2017. And you can really see that now with this Russian bounty situation where, like, whoa, and us pulling out of Syria and leaving our allies there and abandoning them, case after case. So we have changed the world order. If there was any doubt that we are no longer the world leader, look how we have handled this pandemic. But that's something major that the rest of the world looks on us in horror. Other things that we have normalized. We don't expect to see Trump's medical exam. We don't expect to get his tax returns. So many things that in the first week didn't make sense, we've now, again, in this chaos, normalized. Other things in the early weeks, like Melania not going with him to live at the White House, and that first, you may probably have forgotten about that now, but at first she didn't go with him, and we thought it was because of school. Now we know that, those things were being tied together. She was signing a prenuptial. So some of the stuff in the early weeks of my list has started to tie itself together, and more we're starting to see that. But again, what's happened is these major themes continue. And to me, the biggest shock of it all is what you learned in high school history about checks and balances, that in our young democracy, that those were things that were norms, but they weren't put into law in any way, or they weren't enforceable. You start to see a move towards that today with the Supreme Court ruling. But we thought that there were checks and balances. We thought that our legislative branch would have some sort of power to keep him in check. But you start to see that that is dependent on our elected officials having the country's best interests at heart. And with the Republican Party, that hasn't happened. What they have allowed him to do is something that even I, as I started keeping the list, to me is unthinkable. I thought if we got, and that's why I did that We the People March, sort of saw it as a gradual kind of thing, that we did the work in 2018. We did what we needed to do. We took back the House to put a check on him. We did that march, for those of you who came to Washington, D.C., the We the People March, and 3 days later, Pelosi saw 10,000 people in D.C. I'd like to think we were like one of the things that nudged her, and she announced impeachment. But impeachment, you know, we all know what happens afterwards. You know, John Bolton comes out and sells his book, but he was unable to tell these truths. So in between all of this, a hallmark of authoritarianism is the cruelty of it all. And the cruelty when you separate children from their parents at the border. And it just continued. And racism and xenophobia and misogyny. All these things just happen continually. And they were part of, for Trump, how he kept his base interested in him, sadly and sickly as it is. We now look back to the 2016 election, and we understand that racism that brought Trump so much attention through birtherism is also what then kept his base in play. But things have shifted this year. And it's my belief, if you had asked me before the pandemic, that Trump would have lost. And I still believe that, and I believe it will be much worse. My personal goal is for us to win all 50 states and to take 60 Senate seats. And it's possible. You know, there's just a poll in even Alaska, and Biden's only behind by 3 points in Alaska. There are polls out in North Carolina with our Senate candidate ahead there, ahead in Maine, ahead in Kansas, ahead in Arizona. So we have that possibility, but we all have to do the work. And Florida is, and the reason thank you for contacting me, Laurie, the reason I was so eager to do this, and now somebody contacted me, I'm going to do a similar thing in Ohio, are these swing states are so super important, but Florida especially. If Trump loses Florida, he has almost no chance mathematically of winning the Electoral College, almost zero. So I'm hoping again that this is more like, you know, we have 400 plus electoral votes, but you folks are the linchpin of it all, and with your 29 electoral votes. And so it's so super important. I just want to talk about what will it look like if we lose. And I'm not one that tends to be like, you know, fantastical about this stuff. Pretty much everything that I said in those early videos and Move On that are on the website, I remember when I was filming them and the people at Move On were looking at me with their jaw dropping. I mean, I talked about it, we can talk about now, what would happen if you had an unstaffed federal agencies or federal agencies staffed with people that didn't know what they were doing. That was 2017. And then a month later, we had Hurricane Maria, and you know, we still don't have answers for all that, and how upsetting it was to see 3,000 Puerto Ricans die. Now we've had 135,000 Americans die in 4 months. And that is, again, part of what is at stake here, that our government, our federal government as we know it, has been shut down in many ways. It's non-existent. It is staffed with people that you keep hearing about again. Jared is making decisions, Ivanka, this small and shrinking circle. And each time these roles are replaced, you're going down in talent. You're going to someone that just listens to Trump, having Ratcliffe as head of the DNI. These are just all loyalists to him. So there's going to be so much work done to clean this up. But if we don't clean it up, everyone remembers when we watched Saturday Night Live, and it was kind of funny that Kate McKinnon held up the signs in that skit of Love Actually, where she said, "He'll kill us all." Well, that is literally happening now. And you can imagine what will happen in our country if we don't get somebody in 117 days through this election, and hopefully Trump would then just step aside so we can start to deal with this pandemic. But again, so many other things. We have 3 crises now hitting at the same time. We have the pandemic, which reveals, first of all, that the man has no empathy. He's a sociopath. He does not mind. He looks at it as a political calculation. And having lived through it in New York, and sadly you're about to live through it in Florida, there was a weekend when things were about to surge, and we were the first to get it really badly. So people didn't even, doctors and hospitals didn't know what would work and what would not work. And it was unclear if we had enough ventilators for people that were just flooding our hospitals. And a reporter asked Trump, does New York have enough ventilators? And he said, we'll see. I'll never forget that moment. And I think many New Yorkers will never forget that moment. But that's what this has revealed. Not only is he incompetent, and now this week we're seeing about all the corruption, where this is just him like pigs at the trough of them taking our taxpayer money with these PPP loans. And this, you know, I'm sure we know very little of all that's gone on there. So we have the pandemic, we have the social unrest, and the biggest social movement, some say ever, according to the New York Times, the data shows this is even bigger than the civil rights movement in terms of the number of people on the streets showing up. And Trump not being able to not only rise to that occasion, but gassing American citizens in our Washington, D.C., outside our White House, having soldiers there with bayonets. I mean, all the stuff that you read, this is unthinkable. So we have that, and not only his inability to not rise to that occasion, but giving these dystopian speeches, sounding like he's stoking a civil war in our own country. A July 4th set of speeches that no longer are people outside our borders the enemy, Americans are the enemy, which is, again, here we are, authoritarianism. The liberals are the enemy. The media is the enemy. And the third, of course, is what happened with the story with the Russian bounty, which is why you're hearing about schools, because Trump doesn't want you to be hearing about the Russian bounty. And here we are, whatever excuse he has for why, whether he was briefed in 2019, whether he was briefed in last March and February, he's briefed now. And nothing has happened, and Republicans aren't doing anything. So you can see how beholden he is to Russia and to Putin. And that's sort of, I remember tweeting the day he won the election, like Russia has installed a puppet regime into our government, and people being like, oh, that's so fantastic. Well, that is exactly what we have here. So if we do not win this election, then what? Then we will be in full-scale authoritarianism, folks, and there's no way to sugarcoat this. This will be our last remotely fair election. Trump will get rid of term limits. He's already told us multiple times, he's joked about it, but now the reporting indicates that's his wish. We will have something like people call it a mafia family, but it will also be something like a king and queen where he'll just pass it on to Ivanka or Donald Jr. He'll go after people personally. He'll go after our media personally. There'll be nobody running parts of our government, so there'll be no stopping him from doing things with our military that benefit him personally. You have to remember, right now he's on his best behavior because he wants to be reelected. So imagine what would happen if. Now again, I believe that we are positioned to, very well heading into this election in 117 days. But I can't think of a more important election ever. In addition to what's happening in our federal government, our Supreme Court now, we are holding it together with like a small piece of duct tape. We have two of our and RBG and Breyer are in their 80s. They cannot last out another 4 years, especially RBG. If we lose one more seat, the things that are at stake for our younger generation are Roe v. Wade, gay marriage, certainly many elements of what is the immigration policies that have made our country great prior to Trump. That's another thing I tracked in the list. The number of people coming into our country has gone from 145,000 to 10,000. So those are the things quietly that have changed, but you can imagine a Supreme Court with a 6-3 or 7-2 kind of lead of conservatives, and what kind of hell would break loose in our country. So all the things we've taken for granted for the last 50 to 60 years, I mean, listen, I'm LGBTQ. We literally had to go to the Supreme Court to say that it was not legal to discriminate against us at work. That was one of the things that Trump did in his early first year of 2017, put that up to the Supreme Court. So cruelty, discrimination, bigotry, these are all features that are, again, would only get much worse. The incompetence of our government, the corruption of our government would only get much worse. So that's just sort of an overview of where I think things are, and I'd love to hear your thoughts or take your questions.
Thank you so much for that. Really insightful information. We do have some of our group leaders from around the state that have prepared a few questions. I think some of them you've spoken to, but I want them to have an opportunity to introduce themselves from their groups and share the thought process. The first up is Scott with Indivisible Florida 13. If you could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Scott.
I wish everything you said wasn't true, but it sure feels right on. I'm scared to death. Based on your close observation of the Trump presidency, to what extent do you think that he would go to steal the election rather than relying on popular support at the polls?
So again, if you had heard me speak a year ago, I did an event on this at the Mark Twain House, and I spoke about how I did not believe we were going to have a fair election. And that if it was close, that Trump would hold it up and go to the courts, and the courts are already in his favor, and tried to contest certain elements and say that there was voting fraud or whatnot. I'm actually less sanguine about that now. Another reason it's so important for us to win by a lot is obviously so we don't get into that situation. But something shifted when he gassed peaceful protesters. That's the first time that we saw our military push back on him. Mattis left, all these guys left and had nothing to say. You know, they all took their jobs on the board of you know, in Kelly's case, the camps down near you that are taking the migrant children. They all went off and they are making their money off what they did with him. Suddenly everyone spoke up. He crossed a line with our military. They didn't speak up. I mean, Mattis left when we withdrew from and left our allies in Syria. But I think breaking the rules of the Constitution, basically, putting our military against the American people crossed a line for our military. And I believe now, which I didn't believe 6 or 12 months ago, that our military will come escort his butt out of there if he does not try to leave. Interestingly and ironically, there's a really interesting article out this week from the Washington Post, and that is that Trump has done such a job with people talking about voting by mail being fraudulent that Democrats are still doing it. In my state, we did that. But Republicans have stopped voting by mail, and they're getting very low turnout in their primaries, which is concerning Republican strategists, not only for Trump, but for every election, that Republicans are just not going to vote. So that's really an interesting thing. And you see him kind of clamp down. He hasn't talked about it this week. And that's made me start to wonder if they realize that the turnout is so much higher for Democrats. But in any case, we can take nothing for granted. I mean, every poll shows right now we're doing really well, but we don't want it to be close. We don't want it to be like that we win by 272. We want 400. We want to make it very clear as of election night he lost. We want him to be humiliated and leave. And again, I think the military will make him leave. I'm also interested with this ruling today because I think part of the reason he wanted to stay in office is he realizes as soon as he left, he could end up in prison. Now he's going to end up in prison. So that takes away another, one of the things that was kind of holding him back from resigning before being totally humiliated in this election. But I don't think he's, I did in the first year, I wondered if he had some grand scheme because there are actually smart people around him in the beginning. There's no more smart people around him. He does not have a grand plan. You could see that in Tulsa. And then again, even in South Dakota, they said, well, we can only let in 7,500, we're gonna have to cap it. They had 3,700 people show up. So whatever base he has, and interestingly, his approval is actually higher than where he scores on the polls. If the election were held today, it would be a blowout. Again, we have 117 days to go, but I'm not as concerned about whether he will leave as I was. And I was one who was very concerned ahead of time, and people were like, you're crazy. Then the world caught up to me, but now I think things have shifted and we hopefully stay in this position.
Thank you for answering that. Definitely polls. We know in Florida, we don't pay attention to those anymore. We know better than that. So until the final ballot is count, we've got a lot of work to do. Our next question comes from Sandra with Indivisible, Clay County.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Amy. I follow you on Facebook and Twitter. I was at your march in Washington, and I have your book. So
thank you.
Love seeing you. You know, the tagline for your popular The Weekly List is, you know, this is how democracy ends. And you've kind of talked about that a little bit. But, you know, how confident are you that we will still be a democracy on Inauguration Day in 2021? I mean,
well, if we win the election in 117 days, I'm highly confident, but I think it will take decades to, based on what I've been documenting, to restore the world order, to restaff. You have to remember, like our State Department, we've gotten rid of like half of the assistant secretaries. 25% of our key roles in our federal government are still unstaffed 4 years almost later. So I think that process of, and a lot of these people came in and they just fired everybody, you know, this whole deep state belief. So I think that process, he's been putting together a team. That process goes from decades, not years. If we lose the election, then our democracy as we know it, as I said up front, I believe is over. You know, again, we're a young democracy. We're an experiment in democracy in many ways. And this is our first time coming up against something like this, where you literally have somebody who asks for help from foreign adversaries, you know, and you think, wow, there'd be a check and balance. Republicans won't let that happen. And then last week, the Republicans get rid of a clause in our defense bill that says, if you get contacted by a foreign adversary, you have to report that. I mean, this is where we are, folks. So I think Trump has to go, and I think all his enablers have to go. You know, Susan Collins, you know, go across the country. All of these people that have been complicit need to leave. They didn't live up to their oath. I mean, look at your senators. Marco Rubio is one of the worst. I mean, after what Trump did to him, after Russia impacted his run, all these guys did like a complete turn. And have gotten behind him. And I think it's an election not only to clean up Trump, but to clean up and take back the Senate, which is super important. Mitch McConnell is in many ways as bad as Trump. And the things that Mitch has done, I've documented as well, getting rid of blue slips, like the little chips against our democracy. This election could not be more important. So even if you feel like you've done all you can in your state, reach out to your friends in other swing states and help other Senate candidates win. I'm going to start in the coming weeks to put lists together once the primaries are over. And we've chosen candidates, you know, matchups where we can win. And the Senate is super important as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to interject another question that I had before we ask another leader, and that ties in with what you just said with the senators in Florida. What are your thoughts on both of our senators, Rick Scott and Marco Rubio, denouncing Maduro in Venezuela and Castro in Cuba, but they are in fact enabling Donald Trump through these times? What are your thoughts? And also, particularly recently, we've not heard them speaking up about the news of Putin paying to kill U.S. troops.
Yeah, I mean, all of these guys, you know, in the early weeks of my list, I documented that, first of all, I miss John McCain. When McCain and they went on a bipartisan trip, McCain, Amy Klobuchar, and Lindsey Graham went to go assure all of our NATO allies after Trump was elected that we would still, you know, be a good ally to them. And then you think about how Lindsey Graham has gone from this person that was pushing back to in Trump's back pocket. You think of the same thing with Marco Rubio. And all of them just got behind him. And there'll be little glimpses of, okay, Mitt Romney marched with Black Lives Matter, or they do little things here and there on the margin. Romney might have done more than others. But that has been one of the most disappointing things to me, is that our senators, and I don't think either one of your senators went, but 2 years ago for July 4th, they went to Moscow on Independence Day. That was just like Putin doing an intelligence kind of move to say, we own you. So I don't believe the Republican senators, we know, again, with few exceptions of Murkowski or Romney speaking out here or there, have had any semblance of the Americans' interest in place. And just overall patriotism. When we were suffering in New York and Rick Scott wrote that op-ed about not helping blue states, screw you. I mean, like, what country do we live in, folks, because you knew the pendulum was going to swing. And of course, New Yorkers would never think that way about helping Florida. I mean, it's just so thoroughly un-American. So I don't believe either one of them are up for re-election, are they?
No.
Okay,
No.
so yeah.
No.
I mean, and obviously look at DeSantis.
Not soon enough as far as we're concerned.
DeSantis has turned out to be, I apologize for, not apologize, but I feel badly for all of you with what's coming with COVID and him. He's like a mini Trump. But you can see the importance of local elections and state elections as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. We do have a question from Deb with Indivisible Venice.
Hi, Amy.
Hi,
Hi. Do I have to do something with the screen, or am I good?
No, you're good.
Okay, great. Thank you. You're my hero. I have a hero now.
Thank you.
Okay, Trump has amassed about $1 billion in official campaign funds, not to mention dark money. Given what we've got going on right now, what impact could that money, that unlimited supply he says he has, help him to steal our election?
So actually, Biden outraised Trump. I mean, Biden is raising outrageous amounts of money. I think it was last week that they reported second quarter numbers, and Brad Parscale did this tweet with the fire signs, oh, I don't remember the exact numbers, but then Biden actually outraised them. So I think we have kind of neutralized that, and we have the benefit of a lot of these groups that I have a philosophical problem with overall. I don't trust George Conway any further than I could throw him. And they're very clever at coming up with ads that are super effective. And believe me, don't love them because they'll be using them on us next year. But for now, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They're running these ads. They're very well done. There's another group, not Lincoln Project, I can't remember the name. I posted on Facebook, and I'll send it to Laurie to share, that of ex-Republicans that did another one that was just so super effective, that showed Trump's one thing has been the economy, showing abandoned factories. I don't think we have, I'm an ex-Wall Streeter, I don't think we have, things are going to be worse ahead of the election. Wall Street thought that this thing was going to be over with and done. It's not over and done. So Biden is well funded. I'm not concerned about the money part of it. And a lot of the traditional groups like Lincoln Project that normally would be for Trump are with us. Again, don't get used to it. They'll be doing the same dirty tricks to us in 2 years and 4 years, but I'm less concerned than I would be.
That is reassuring, but that's where we come into grassroots, because we're people power. So,
yes.
and definitely the good candidates and causes still need our money.
I mean, this is an unusual election. I think it's more important to get out the vote and make sure everyone, I think for and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you have until, is it October 5th to register to vote?
Yes, it's 30 days out.
Yeah, so we just have to make sure everyone is registered, and if you're going to vote by a ballot, you get that ballot in advance. Money's great, but this is an unusual, you don't need the infrastructure that you do because you can't go knock doors and all the rest. We just need to get everyone to the polls or to send in their ballot, whichever you're more comfortable doing.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got a question from Ronald with Palm Beach Indivisibles.
Hi, Amy. So along with what we've been talking about, so the Democratic Party is banking on a large voter turnout, obviously. That's what we need to do, and that's what we've been trying to do is increase voter turnout. to overwhelm Trump's potential attempt to steal the election.
Yes.
A recent Newsweek article proposed that we preemptively build a people's firewall that, deep, right across the entire country, that reflects public revulsion at the potential for Trump to undermine the democratic system, our democratic system of governance. What would that look like? And what can we as grassroots activists do to block any attempts by the GOP to suppress the vote and engage in fraud in this election cycle?
Okay, well, we know that they're suppressing the vote because that's happening in every primary. I think what we can do individually beyond our own networks in Florida to get people to make sure that by October 5th they're registered, if they're not already, is to reach out. If you want to do something each day, reach out to a friend from high school on Facebook, or send them an email, or send them a text, especially if they live in a state that is not safely blue or not safely red, which is a lot of states this year. Texas is in play, Georgia is in play. A lot of states that were traditionally safe are not safe for Trump. And make sure they are registered to vote. The key is going to be turnout. The good news is the primaries are showing like huge turnouts. I know your primary is still coming, but we just had our primary in New York. I have never seen anything like it. People stood outside. It was 90 degrees, which for us is hot. I know for you folks it's nothing, but for us it was hot. At 1 a.m. at a primary, people were still lining up to vote. Granted, it was slower because we only had 2 machines working, but people don't show up for primaries. That was more people than I've seen for a presidential election living here. So I know in my state, like, people are ready to show up, and we're not alone. Like you see that in the Kentucky primary and in plenty of primaries. But the trick is really going to be as we get closer to the election and they start that nonsense on social media that was so effective last time, they were very specific about it, and they'll do it again. They'll target areas, it'll be micro-targeted on Facebook and other things to make people not want to show up to vote, to discourage people from voting. The way we win is to get to the polls, or to get mail in the ballot, whatever is safer. I was surprised. I walked the line with one of our elected officials who was up for re-election at like 9 o'clock at night with people still standing. And a lot of them said they had like the ability to mail in ballot, but they didn't trust it. So they wanted to just show up and vote. But I think we have to tell people if they mail by, don't be afraid. If you don't feel comfortable because of COVID showing up, mail in your ballot and it is safe. Don't listen to Trump. And as well, it's super important, and your state has it, I wrote it down, you have early voting from October 24th to 31st. I did early voting. I went, there was no one in line, I voted, I left. I came back on voting day, and then there's like hours and hours waits. So really encourage people to go early. Almost every state has early voting. Other states will have mail-in. But we want to get as many votes banked as we can. Early voting is the best. There's never a line. It's easy. You're in, you're out. And for people concerned about their vote getting counted, that's a great way to do it.
Great question. I want to interject. I was on a call with Ronald and Mary from another Indivisible group here in Florida a couple of days ago. And stay tuned, folks. I just put a connection to us, the Indivisible Florida groups. We will probably be having an action, a call to attention for folks to demand that all supervisor of elections in the state of Florida retain the images at the time your ballots are scanned. It was shocking to me, and Ronald, you can speak on this for a moment, that many of our supervisor of elections do not keep those images. Let me repeat that, they don't keep it. And that's really an accountability and traceability. Am I understanding that correctly, Ronald?
Yes, that was a very informative call that we were on. Apparently, as we all know, we have paper ballots. Every ballot in Florida is a paper ballot. And those paper ballots are scanned one way or another, whether it's an early ballot, whether it's a vote by mail ballot, or a ballot at the polls on election day. And when that ballot is scanned, it produces a ballot image, a digital ballot image. That is what is actually counted, that digital ballot image. The law says that the ballots, all ballots, must be maintained for 22 months. Well, many of the SOEs, supervisors of elections in Florida, are not maintaining and not retaining the digital ballots. They're maintaining the paper ballots, but not the digital ballots. So that's why when we have a recount, as we did in both Laurie's County, Broward, and mine, Palm Beach, in 2018, they have to use the paper ballots, and they have to go and open up the seals and the boxes and go through this hand ballot by ballot counting, because they are not maintaining the digital ballot. So that's something that the Florida Network is going to look into. And I'll mention one other thing that my SOE told me just yesterday. The Democrats, as you said, Democrats are continuing to push vote by mail. And in Palm Beach County, the number of Democrats registered for vote by mail are 3 times the number of Republicans. And even my supervisor of elections questioned that, and whether Republicans are going to wake up at some point in time and realize they better do something about that.
Wow, good to know. Thank you for sharing that. We do have another question, Amy, from Cynthia from Indivisible, Florida 13.
Good evening, Amy.
Hi there.
Hi. Do you think we should be urging Nancy Pelosi to ask the Judiciary, the Commerce, Armed Service, and Intelligence Committees to hold hearings or take steps to safeguard against the scenario, perhaps, of the president invoking the Emergency Powers Act, either before, during, or after the election?
Yeah, that is something that I'm less concerned about. We're gonna have to see if we're getting closer, what's going to happen. I can't imagine the grounds that he would have to do that, and that's something that the Congress would have to approve in order to somehow move our election away to a different day. So I think we give him a lot of benefit for, I mean, it's not that these things won't cross his mind, but I believe that we're surfacing these issues now, and that Pelosi and Biden are preparing for those kind of things. Again, we're gonna have to play that by ear, but I don't believe there's anything that they can do where we sit today that's a good use of their time, or that they're gonna cooperate with or care. Trump will try to do whatever he's going to try to do. I mean, look what he's doing now. We're firing people, on Friday nights. Every Friday night, someone is fired. He just has gotten away with it for so long. He'll keep trying to get away for it. That's why it's so important in my mind that it's not close. Even in your state, that we not leave it to be like we're going to win by 100,000 votes. It has to be a huge margin. We have to get people to vote and get them to the polls and get young people to vote. And if you know of young people, just have them email me, or Laurie, they can contact you. I'm starting out a call next Tuesday with millennials to organize a group around the country to get millennials to the polls. But I think people get it now. I feel a lot more encouraged with all the young people that I saw show up in New York. I think that there's, again, we have to get people, as we get closer and the stuff starts, that they try to tell people not to vote and this and that and da-da-da-da. We just have to make sure people vote. And we know we've been through this once already. Another thing you can do is make sure you're on the voting roll. That was something that happened in the last election, that Russia was able to, they haven't put it on Russia yet, but I documented that in my book, that there were certain states like Texas and North Carolina where red districts, you would get there and everything was fine, but blue districts, people were not on the poll, or there would be electronic problems. So count on there being some funny stuff going on, which is why we have to aim for overwhelming everywhere and aim for 400 plus electoral votes. So it can't be close.
Thank you. And going back to what you earlier said about our senators and all that, we need a slam dunk here in Florida. Keep that momentum going.
They interfered with your election in 2018, and no one's doing anything. So just that is the game you have to play. It has to be overwhelming the kind of victory that you're having.
Yeah, and again, I did put in the chat the link to the Florida Indivisible Network. Many of the groups on this, the leaders that you're hearing from around the state, we're doing our part. So whether it's phone banking, we're not door knocking. Maybe some are in safer counties. On mine, we're actually doing door hanger drops. Folks are texting. So there's a way, if you're new to this group, then please get involved. Check out what's happening in your county. You can go to that website. I did see somebody say a question in there, and I apologize because there's a lot of questions coming in, and we do have one more I want to get to Donna, and then we'll open it up for questions from the group. Somebody said an October surprise. Like, are you at all thinking, oh my goodness, could we see an October surprise from him? Who knows,
Every
right?
day is a
Every day.
surprise with him.
Yeah.
I think we're just numb to it. I mean, what is left? I mean, I say this with no joy in my heart, but I lived through it in New York. What's going to happen in Florida and Texas and California and Arizona, you know, when the cases spike and they're out of control, then the hospitals get full and the care isn't as good and the death toll starts to go up. I mean, all of this stuff is going to start to cycle and recycle around the country. It will probably come back to New York. I mean, so our country, like, what is left for us to be shocked by? I mean, every day there's a shock. Now we're sending kids back to school. I think we're in a certain way numb to whatever he says. It'll be like, oh, but then the next day, oh, he can't really not fund the schools. Again, I think it goes back to, it's super important that everybody votes and prepares to vote. They check that they're actually registered to vote. All the little safeguards that you take for granted that you don't take for granted this year. And yeah, there will be surprises. The surprise with Hillary was unrelated. That was a media thing. That was, in retrospect, really poorly done by our media. You know, I think we're prepared for something like that. I do suspect that will happen. I think it will happen every day up until then. And he'll pull something else on us. You know, we'll got war in January. Who knows? We might try to go to war. I mean, the good news is the military is not with him anymore. I mean, so, you know, all of these things is we're sort of closing in, and we just all have to be super aware. One thing I will add that was super effective in New York is texting people to remind them, because people were not as receptive in New York to, and we were sort of at the other side of it. Some people voted, like myself, because I went early because I just wanted to show up, and it felt like an act of resistance to actually vote. But you have to keep reminding people and make sure, like, get the texting up and running. Everybody should be texting by October. Make sure you register by this day. Make sure you get your ballot in by this day, and keep reminding.
Lori, may I follow up on that question?
Yeah, absolutely.
May I follow up on that? You're basing a lot of what you say, Amy, on the getting out the vote, which is something that most of us indivisible groups are doing. Yeah. What if we don't get the opportunity to vote? What if the surprise that the whoever put in that question is referring to is an attempt by Trump to create civil war in this country by creating conditions in the streets that are so bad that he feels he has to bring out the National Guard, call out the National Guard, and suspend the election because it's just not possible at this point in time to have an election. And after all, he's the only one who can solve the problems.
Well, you see that happening. I'm not saying he won't try, but remember, the National Guard has to be accepted by each state for them to come. And the grounds of postponing it for the, say, pandemic, like how much worse can the pandemic get? I mean, we are a quarter of the cases in the entire world and a quarter of the deaths. So I don't see the grounds for him doing that. We've kind of played that out. I do see the civil unrest and him trying to stoke civil war, and Fox News as his propaganda helping. I think we all just have to be aware and vigilant that things are going to get worse. The pandemic makes people less likely in New York when it was really bad here. It actually decreased the violence because people didn't go out. Our crime went way down. So, you know, as pertains to your state, we'll have to see where things are at that point, but those are things he's already trying. We just have to be prepared for it. And in order, under the Constitution, to not hold an election, it has to be something that Congress and Nancy Pelosi approves. And obviously, so that is a safeguard for us. Trump can't decide whether or not to hold the election.
Good to know. Great questioning. I have one more, and I just want to point out, I know folks are anxious, a lot of questions in there. Promise, if you don't mind, Amy, you'll indulge just a few more minutes.
Yeah,
don't
absolutely.
worry.
Yep.
She's agreed to stay on for a few more minutes. Thank you so much. This is important to Florida. It's important to all of us. Jennifer Tanner, I promise I got you. I know you have something to jump in that earlier conversation about the images and the ballot, but I do want to take one last question from one of our leaders, and this would be from Donna from Sarasota Stands Together. Donna, if you can unmute. Maybe I'm not seeing her. Hang on, let me go into Donna.
Is that good?
Yes. Sorry about that. Gotcha. Sorry about that. That was on me. I apologize.
Amy, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to see you in such a great venue. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. You've mentioned the military and you've mentioned the pandemic and so forth. That's going to continue for a while. If there is a worst case scenario and Trump is still in office after January 2021, what are ways that ordinary people can resist during the pandemic other than mass protests?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to focus on that at that time. I think that our cities will be on fire if he doesn't leave or if he wins. I mean, look at all the people that showed up despite the pandemic around the country. This was, again, the biggest social movement in the history of our country in terms of the number of people who came out in a pandemic. So I rather punt on that question because I don't believe it's going to be, but if we get to that point, we're going to have to march and we're going to have to figure it out. It's been one step at a time. I sort of viewed it as in 2018, the act was to take back the House. In 2019, the act was to go through impeachment and at least get everything on the record. In 2020, the act is to take the White House and the Senate. So those are the goals and let's work towards them. If that doesn't happen, we'll have to reconvene, but things will be as bad as they are now. It's hard to believe things could get worse, but they will be worse.
Thank you for that. But you know what? I think for many folks on this call, knowing your history and everything, it's reassuring to us that you, as somebody who follows this on a daily basis, have a little more hope, particularly in the military and our justice system. So that is reassuring, but that doesn't mean that we are going to sit on our laurels here in Florida. We got a lot of work to do. I'm going to defer over to my co-leaders on this call, Jane Hunter and whoever else my co-leaders have been monitoring the chat. I haven't had a chance to do that, so I know there's some questions that have popped up if they want to go ahead and jump in. Thank you.
I will start. Mike Thomas and I have been compiling the questions, and Mike, why don't I start and read the first few, and then you can pick it up from me if that's okay. All right, so I've sort of put these serially in an email. Let me go back to the beginning. And this is from Garen Hirschhorn. He's asking a question. Trump is now interviewing senior leaders in the Defense Department to vet for loyalty. How concerned should we be about the Secret Service and Defense Department senior leaders about protecting Trump from being removed from the White House, assuming Biden wins the election?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on that. So the people that now are surrounding him are all loyalists. To me, the most alarming thing is our DNI, that they, the guy that Ratcliffe now, who's just a real nut, has no intelligence experience, and intelligence is super important ahead of an election. So we have to assume that our election will be interfered on. Within the military, though, again, what happened after that gassing, if you check back on the, if you look at my weekly list, it's the week of the picture that week is the young people getting gassed. And look at all the different members of the military that either issued statement, the Joint Chiefs, former defense secretaries. I think that there is a critical mass that is against him. So it's sort of irrelevant. He can appoint the defense secretary, Esper, who also kind of turned on him, but I don't have any faith in Esper. But beyond that, the Secret Service, separate. Like Secret Service, he has, and they're upset with him. If you look at my list from last week, several of them got sick in Tulsa. A lot more of them got sick when they went to the event with Pence in Arizona. There's still, I believe, at least a dozen Secret Service members in a hotel in Phoenix because they went to this event. So there was one quote from a Secret Service member who said, we signed up to take a bullet for him, but not to get sick for him. So, I think that they will do the job that they're assigned to protect him. But beyond that, he's not winning any friends with putting them in harm's way. I think that is broad-based.
The next question is a little bit off our beaten path here, so I would like to acknowledge it because it's important, but we can also just hold this for a future meeting. It's from Larry Zwane, and he's asking, what authentic plan, meaningful changes will we see to address economic growth in Black and people of color communities?
Yeah, I think whoever takes over, that will be front and center. I mean, whoever Biden has as his vice president, and I think everywhere in our communities, that is something that there's a huge amount of awareness about, even as COVID, that the New York Times had to do a Freedom of Information Act request to the CDC to get data, to show that for Black Americans and Latino Americans, that this is like 2 to 3 times more prevalent than for white Americans with COVID. So I think that will be something that after the election, there's a huge shift in our country. I mean, again, those are part of the protests, that will be part of the next agenda, as well as repairing. I mean, listen, like I said, this is going to take decades. If you read my list, it is a trail map back, but you have no idea what we have lost, like the simple things, all the environmental protections. Basically, someone joked that we should put a restraining order around Obama's legacy. Trump hates Black people. So he's basically, and he hates Obama. He's tried to undo everything. And the final act of cruelty would be to undo Obamacare in the middle of a pandemic. So all of these things that I've been listing each week, it's not going to be so easy. Whoever takes over, they're going to have a great group. Whoever the vice president is and the cabinet, they are going to have their work cut out for them.
Let me go on to the next question, which is from Anissa Kareem, asking, this country was built on a system of checks and balances. Clearly those checks are not balancing. How do we overcome that before the election?
So we can't do it before the election, but I think one of the things we know now that there's a big difference between norms and codifying something. So it's been a norm that presidential candidates would supply their tax returns each year, would get a medical exam each year, and we would know the results because they serve us. Those have been norms, and now we know that those need to be codified. Those need to be put into law. So I think you'll see a move to some of the things that we've sort of accepted under Trump to make those into laws. There was a bipartisan group set up by Christine Todd Whitman and what's his name? I can see his, anyway, a bipartisan group in the Northeast here to start to talk about some of these things that we learned. The checks and balances did not work. Clearly they did not work. So I think there will be awareness now that when people's intentions are not good, how do we protect our democracy? That's all going to be part of when I say it's going to take decades to repair this. What happens when you have somebody whose intent is to hurt the country that they serve and just deconstruct it from within? That is literally what we are living right now. I mean, one of my friends jokes that the Republicans are a death cult if they don't mind that people are dying right now. And as fantastical as that sounds, that's what is happening with this pandemic. Maybe Trump cares less because Black and brown people are suffering more, and yellow, and it's unthinkable. But I think it's out there now. It's in the light of day, and then we will start over the next decades addressing these things.
So I am going to pass the questioning to Mike Thomas for a bit.
Okay, the next one is Eileen McHenry asked, how do we better engage young people?
Yeah, so I'm, again, my email is siskind at thenewagenda.net. If you know any millennials that would like to join, we're having an initial call next Tuesday. I've had all these millennials approach me to say, I want to help get out my generation. And just like the TikTok thing that was so effective with Tulsa, I think millennials know how to reach millennials, and somebody, you know, my age should not be telling them what to do and what platforms. So I'm going to start to convene and let them do it on their own from there, that group, to bring out what I can do for millennial votes. So anybody who fits that, who has a son or grandson or granddaughter or daughter that might want to be on that, have them join us next Tuesday and write to me. Away from that, we just have to talk to them about the importance of this election as relates to what will happen for the rest of their lifetimes. Because a lot of the things that as young people they take for granted, growing up and going to college in a diverse setting and having gay marriage be legal, all these kind of things that seem very basic to them are going to be gone. I mean, we had a ruling this week on contraceptives. Those kind of things. We had a ruling last week on Roe v. Wade. One more judge, and we will lose a judge. We cannot count on RBG, God bless her, to live another 4 years in this court. One more judge and all those things are gone. Gay marriage is gone. All of those things are gone. So for this generation, for these younger people, this is more important to them than to any of us here that are older and speaking. So I think we talk to them about the importance of that, but it's really got to come from them. They've got to talk to their own. And I was really happy in New York. You don't usually see young people out there home because I know my daughter's working from home, my son's working from home because of the pandemic, and they're talking to each other about these things. They were very engaged at our election, which gave me some hope. And again, I think we just have to talk about the importance of what's coming, but it has to come from their peer group.
Before you ask the next question, Mike, if I can jump in, we didn't discuss the rulings today by the Supreme Court. Could you just take a moment and tell us your thoughts on the rulings that came out today?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a legal expert, but the ruling, one thing, if you follow my book and follow what I post, Deutsche Bank is super central. And I have a Wall Street background, so I know what Trump has been doing with Deutsche Bank is so unusual. The fact that a group that is a private banking would lend him money when the real estate group wouldn't is really, really unusual. And Deutsche Bank was known as the Russian laundromat for Russian money. So even if we don't get to see, it's given the way this ruling went, the grand jury will get to see his tax returns, they'll get to see stuff from Deutsche Bank. We will not very likely get to see those ahead of the election. But that stuff will eventually find its way out to the light of day, and Trump will face the consequences of that, I believe, after he is out of office. I believe one of the reasons he's wanted to stay in office was to protect himself from that. Once he leaves, that's gone. And now it's already gone with this ruling. So that stuff is going to be out there for the grand juries. I know our House committees, there's 2 different efforts to fight to get some of that information as well. But this one had to do with, again, the Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance. And that is a case that involves, they're going to get the information from Deutsche Bank. They're going to get the information from his accounting firm, Mazars. It has to do with a lot of different things, but you get to the foreign transactions. Was Trump getting money from Russia to run? Why did Jared Kushner get a loan from Deutsche Bank like a week before the election of $285 million? All this stuff that's in my list, that it's like big question marks. So Deutsche Bank to me is like ring, ring, ring. But then also, if you heard me speak early on in 2018, one of the things that really stood out to me is it wasn't that, as gross as Trump is with his personal life and you know, what he being with paying off women to have sex with him right after his child was born and all that, that's like a whole other thing for the Republicans to deal with. But he paid off then to be quiet ahead of an election, which is illegal to do. And that is also something that's going to come out. These payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, that's all part of this lawsuit. So this lawsuit, even if it doesn't, give us all the stuff ahead of the election, it has a consequence to him on the other side of it. And people always say, I hope he gets the pandemic, da, da, da. I want him to live long enough to face the consequences. I tweeted today, I believe now he's probably thinking to himself that he's wishing he didn't run for president because he was getting away with all this stuff beforehand, and now he's going to be held accountable. After office. It might not be before the election, but he's going to.
From your lips to God's ear.
Yes.
Go ahead, Michael. I apologize. I just want to ask about that. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, where do you, I think you've already covered this some, but where do you think our efforts could best be utilized in combating voter suppression?
I think closer to it, follow me on. I'm actually thinking about voting early and going to a state to be a physical presence if it's safe enough to travel. A state like Kentucky, where they're going to be like people with guns and stuff standing at polling stations. There might be a move. This is something I've entertained, but we have to see how it plays out and where the pandemic is and all that. But there might be a move to have people that are faces of safety show up at polling places in some of these places where there is voter suppression and intimidation of people of color. I believe that Trump has already called for that, and the Republican Party is already organizing around that. The pandemic, again, throws that all into we don't know. But I think that's something, as we get like within 60 days of the election, we all need to start paying attention to. Those of us who are able-bodied and able to travel, whether we go to some of these places where there's a large African-American turnout, and Trump and Mitch McConnell and all the rest are going to be trying to get, what we saw in Michigan with the Liberate crowd with their guns and their neo-Nazi flags and their Confederate flags, getting those kind of people to kind of stand up and intimidate. I don't doubt that they will try that. So to be determined, that's something that we definitely will have.
All right, well, some of these are sort of repeats. How can we ensure, what's this, Hinda Rosenbaum asks, how can we ensure the integrity of the election process? Can we make sure the election is not hacked, or no cheating, no disenfranchisement, et cetera?
No, it's going to be hacked.
Yeah.
It's going to be. Like last time Obama was in office, and look what Russia was able to do. Now they've got a welcome mat rolling out. So I think whatever we can do locally to assure that there's some sort of record of our voting, what you're talking about is super important, to be super vigilant about what's happening in your state. I think we just have to anticipate it and do whatever we can to fight it ahead of time. I'll take two more and then we'll call it a night.
All right, let's see if I can get a good one here.
Okay.
How can we as voters and activists get voters and activists to focus not just on the presidency, but state legislative races, as DJT is not the problem, he's a symptom of a corrupt Republican Party that's been working since at least Gingrich to break down our government.
Yeah. So I'm sure that you're about to see, sadly, in this pandemic, how important your local government is, because you have Trump pushing down to the states, to the governors, to do whatever you want. You're all on your own. It's up to the governors. I have all great governors. It's up to them. And then in your state, you have a governor who takes it one step further and pushes it down to, it's up to the mayors. I'm not going to do anything statewide. We certainly saw that in New York, that Cuomo was a great leader, but who you had as your local leader determined how well you were going to fare in these kind of things. So it's really important to people, and the pandemic is a great example of how important local government is. Are you getting testing? Are you setting up for overflow when the hospitals are full? Those kind of things are going to play out now in the real world, sadly, for you folks in Florida and Texas and Arizona in the coming weeks. Like, what are we doing to manage this pandemic? As well, I think the lesson has been over the last 4 years that local matters in terms of countering Trump. It matters on your school board, whether you have we have an issue of systemic racism in my area that we're trying to address in our school board. It matters with what you're doing with the environment. All these things that we're going to need to turn back on, Biden's going to have his hands full. It's all going to start locally. So these local elections for everything from, again, school board to your assembly to your state, your state senate are going to be super important. And you see that again, like look at Ohio, the Republican legislatures kicked out Amy Acton, and now Ohio has a surge. I mean, you're just really seeing it play out locally, how important all these layers of government are beyond the White House and our federal, government, like, our legislature, like Congress and the Senate. Local matters.
All right, I guess, well, one person asked, do you trust mail-in voting?
Yes,
Okay.
you have to. Again, if you are physically able and if Florida is in better shape in November, I would show up. And what I am planning to do, you have at least, I guess I've read and you all are better experts at this than I am, but you have at least at every district between October 24th and 31st to vote, with the option of additional days beyond that. So go vote early. There's no line, there's nobody there. You go in, 5 minutes in and out. And that way you're banked. You know that your vote's going to be counted on election night. You're going to see it there. If you don't feel comfortable, vote early. And if you feel like you want that active resisting to actually show up and vote early. Don't wait in a hotline or whatever where you have risk of this virus on election day. Vote early. But I do trust and your state knows how to do it better than other states. Other states, I think, are going to have issues, including my own. We're still counting ballots from our primary 2 weeks ago. But you're a state that knows how to do it. But yes, if you can vote in person, vote in person.
Thank you so much. We are so grateful to you, Amy, for taking time with us. This has been amazing to hear. Yeah, thumbs up, use those emojis. We are so grateful for your time and your expertise. I do want to take a moment and again, thank you profoundly for just taking time out. She was very gracious and just really mindful of what the work we have to do in Florida. And again, the Indivisible Florida Network is a group of indivisibles and other resistant groups around the state, in addition to different, the Democrats and different groups around the state. But I always tell people it's like church. You got to go where you're comfortable, where you feel at home. And some people, they have the capacity only to do postcards. That's okay. We'll take that. And some people can text. That's awesome. We'll take that as well. Some people can hop on a phone. I'm all about that 20-40 minute, make those phone calls. They can do that as well. We cannot look at polls. We can't get settled. We can't get safe. And that's what all of these leaders in different groups around the state, we're committed to doing the work that we can in our community. So definitely connect with them. I want to also shout out all my co-leaders on here tonight that help moderate the chat, ask the questions. And for folks that don't know, every single week they are working hard in your community. They are reaching out to folks. They're doing voter registration. They're doing petition drives, whatever they can do. And they haven't just started. This has been going on since way back. So, and not only in addition to those responsibilities they do in their local community, we as a group statewide, we are meeting. And what you just heard, we have, in addition to that, we are connecting with folks around the country talking about voter suppression. And I did want to go back to Jennifer Tanner, but unfortunately I see I'm just going to check one more time. I think she dropped off the call, but I will just plug again, all of you who are on the email list, we will send. Oh, she's on.
Yeah, she's on.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't see her on there. Jennifer? Do you want to take 1 minute, if you can, and just share with us a little synopsis of what we talked about for folks about those voter images, ballot images, I'm sorry. She's going to have to unmute. If somebody can help unmute her, because I couldn't find her in the list.
Mute me.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Hi,
Okay.
Jennifer.
Hi there. Well, I didn't realize you were leading this thing, and Deborah Cohen, who's also on, she knows more about what John's doing than I do, but the quick synopsis is, if we want to protect the vote, we know about suppression and all those things, but the most important thing is to make sure that the votes really count. And John has figured out that these ballot images, if we can keep them, and we're supposed to legally keep them, we just have to make, that's why he's doing a lawsuit. And we're going to be doing, and Lori's part of this, an action within the next couple of days. Everyone that's on the call, when we send you what we work out, we're going to have a script, we're going to have calling emails. Everybody goes to their SOEs to say, we want this. That will support John in his lawsuit, which is going to happen in the next 2 weeks. I can't believe how many Indivisibles are here in Florida. I'm really impressed. We can actually change what happens in Florida. If we change Florida, and you've just said, Amy, that Florida, if he doesn't get Florida, he doesn't get it. And what happens in Florida then is going to reverberate the rest of the country, that these ballot marking devices, bad as they are, if we can get the copies of that very first day and they don't destroy them, any single person can go and access them, because it's not the original, it's the copy. They don't throw them away, we can all access them. Then we make sure we don't get hacked.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
I
sharing.
hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm super glad that somebody caught you that, because I couldn't see you in the chat. So I'm really glad that you were able to share that. So again, that information will go out to folks. We'll make sure that you get that information. We will also scan through the chat. I apologize, we probably didn't get to everybody. That's how enthusiastic everybody was to hear from our speakers. So we'll try and follow up on those as well. Let's see, make sure I got everybody in there. Thank you. We went a little over 20 minutes. Again, thank you, Amy. In parting, I do want to say Amy asked us to share, and I will follow up again with her contact information. If you know those millennials, I did put into the chat. She shared a wonderful document on a lot of resistant groups around the country. Did you want to speak about that, Amy?
Oh, a woman who is a friend in Portland that hosted a big event for me out there, put that together. It's just a way, if you want to volunteer for any state, if you're in a safe area and you want to volunteer beyond Florida, it's just a guide of every state how you can get involved.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, everybody, have a wonderful night. Can we give applause for our speaker tonight? All right. Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Really well done.